Schwarzenberger.
Martin,
Larry?
are we, I assume we're going to have to do our budgeting via Zoom.
Yeah, we will, unfortunately.
Yeah. Maybe it's a good idea to get those big pages printed off then to do that.
Yeah, it'd be good to have that easily accessible.
Corporate services can do that when everything's ready.
Okay, great.
I think everybody's here except for Councillor Michelle. Still got a couple minutes. There's Councillor Michelle. Alrighty, we'll get started.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep, I sure can.
Good. Just finished my dinner. I snuck out. Kathy called me.
No worries. I'll call this regular meeting of council, Town of Oliver, Monday, January 11th, 2021. I'll call this meeting to order. And are there any late items to add to the agenda?
No, they are not.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
I'll call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion carries. We'll move into adoption of prior minutes. Adoption of December 14th, 2020 regular open council meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to adopt those minutes as circulated?
So moved.
Thank you. Second,
Second.
any discussion? Call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to committee reports. Item 1, December 14th, 2020, Committee of the Whole meeting minutes for receipt. Can I get a motion to receive those minutes?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Moved and
Second.
second. Thank you. Any discussion? Call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. And moving to item 2, I'll ask for a verbal report from Chairperson Schwarzenberger of the Committee of the Whole meeting this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Johansson. There were 2 items that we discussed at the Committee of the Whole meeting. The first one under council or under water matters was the 2018 to 2022 strategic plan 4th quarter update. The CAO gave us an update on the progress of our strategic priorities, and that update was received. And the other item of business was bylaw amendments for a downtown design guidelines. There was quite a bit of discussion over this. It was a great start put forward by our Director of Corporate Services, or Development Services rather, and lots of back and forth on certain items. And it was decided that council would direct staff to schedule a downtown design guideline workshop so that we could go a little more into depth in a number of issues and come forward with a downtown design guideline that would be acceptable to all of council. So that's something that we will have in future. And that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Schwarzenberger. We'll move on to water matters. Item 1 is the COVID-19 Safe Start Grant for local governments. CFO has a report, and I'll pass it over to the CFO. Doug, I think you're muted.
There we go. I'm just having some trouble for whatever reason. I've lost my network connection, so I had to do a standby. The town of Oliver received in, I believe it was November or December, I just can't quite remember, $1.591 million from the provincial government for COVID-19 restart monies. The provincial government has recognized that COVID-19 has created a financial burden on local governments. In order to provide financial assistance, the provincial and federal governments have jointly announced nearly $2 billion in joint spending, of which $540 million has been allocated to local governments, $418 million to community infrastructure, and $1 billion to transit, TransLink, and ferries. The $540 million was further divided into 3 funding streams. 2 of the streams, development services, $15 million, and strengthening communities, $100 million, will be application-based funding. Further information on these funding streams will be forthcoming. The 3rd stream of $425 million has been directed to local government operations impacted by COVID-19. This funding is intended to support local governments as they deal with increased operating costs and lower revenues due to COVID-19. Eligible costs include addressing revenue shortfalls, facility reopening and operating costs, emergency planning and response costs, bylaw enforcement and protective services, such as fire protection and policing, and community and electronic technology costs to improve interconnectivity and virtual communications, services for vulnerable persons, those are individuals who deal with disabilities, mental illness or addictions, homelessness or other vulnerabilities, and other related costs. The table that I put together is a summary of the costs that staff could identify that the town has directly had an impact on the operations for 2020. I will go through each one. They totaled $626,000. We had a reduction of our user fees, water user fees. That was a 4% reduction of its water user fees. That was $221,000. There's a reduction of the sewer user fees. That was $100,000. Solid waste user fees, we also reduced those. That was $30,000. We had a decrease in corresponding decrease in utility penalties because we did not raise our water rates, and that was $10,000. And in some cases, we relaxed our utility penalties as well. We also reduced our property tax penalty from 10 to 5%, and that was staged from a 1% and then a 4%, 1% on July 3rd, and the remainder 4% on October 1st. The property tax increase was reduced from 9% to nil. That was an impact of $160,000. Also, we have some, on the expenditure side, we had the relocation of council, and that's still ongoing. We went up to the Venables Theatre and the various challenges we had with doing that. We're also refurbishing council chambers. We also had some town hall security enhancements, the fob entry, also the camera, etc. We are going to be doing some further enhancements in the finance building. We do not have a secure entrance per se. In the finance building, we don't have a fob entry. The electronic technology, that's going to continue to be enhanced. Fire department, the SCBA mask, that was a mandatory due to WorkSafe BC, as well as various safety equipment supplies town-wide. And all those total up to either an increase in expenditures or a decrease in revenues of $626,000. I would like to point out that the police or the tax increase of 9%, the reason why in my in the summary that I prepared that where I'm saying the shortfall tax money is recommended to be put into the policing reserve, by moving that money back into the operating budget really does not help us in any way, because the shortfall that we're going to incur when the policing contract comes to be in 2022 or 2023 is really it's a shortfall of revenue in the tax rate. And so therefore it is recommended that it be moved into reserve at this point in time. Also, I want to point out, and I know that the municipalities across the province have utilized the restart money in many different ways. There have been allocations for economic development via Chamber of Commerce's, support services related to homelessness and mental health, support to seniors activity centers, museums, etc. And we also provide, the town, when I say we, the Royal We, provides financial support to organizations via the regional district, or we do that independently. The Oliver Tourism Association has contacted town staff and have indicated they will be incurring a shortfall in their 2020 budget of approximately $65,000. Oliver Parks and Recreation have indicated to myself that they're projecting a shortfall in revenues of $243,000. And staff have not identified any funds directly to these organizations there, as they were funded through the RDOS and the Electoral Area C. If the Electoral Area C wishes to contribute to these organizations, then council may wish to contribute as well. As a note, and I believe the mayor, you were at that recent regional district meeting, that there was a notice of motion. I don't know what the result of that notice of motion was, is to allocate their COVID restart monies. And I believe they had close to $800,000 that it was going to be allocated on a population base. So that may be forthcoming to a next meeting. I'm uncertain at this point in time. But certainly, and I did hear some other people mention the Heritage Society, maybe the museum. I haven't heard from those organizations as well. But the recommendation that I'm putting forth is to utilize 626,000 of the monies currently to offset our either loss of revenues or increased expenditures in the 2020 fiscal year, and to carry forward the remainder into 2021. And so with that, your worship, I conclude my report. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO. Just to respond back to your comment about the RDOS process, that is still ongoing, and there hasn't been anything identified at this point as far as using any of the restart money for lost revenue in any of the particular areas at this point in time. Although there is some discussion going on about distributing it amongst all the electoral areas. No firm decisions have been made at this point in time. Is there any comments, questions, Council, on the report? Councillor Mattis?
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple questions through the CFO. The 160,000 shortfall, as an example, that will be ongoing. Is that something that we can claim each year now until, like, we had a 5-year plan for that, and so now it would become a 6-year plan, let's say. So until we recoup that in the 6th year, would we be able to continue to claim that $160,000 loss each year and fold that into the reserve fund?
Through the chair to Councillor Mattis, yes, I believe you can. The bigger challenge you're going to have at the end of all this, keep in mind, to put it simply, right now, we've raised approximately, I think it's around $300,000, maybe almost $400,000 worth, or 9% tax increase. Our estimated RCMP contract was going to be about $1.1 million. At the end of the day, we can utilize the monies in year one, shall we say, of 2023, for example. Let's say the contract came to be. So we utilize our reserve money and we pay that. The problem you would have is in 2024 is you would be short that net difference in your tax rate. So you really do need to get your tax rate, your tax base up to support that.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand that. And the plan was we're only skipping 1 year of the 5-year plan. So now the 5-year plan becomes a 6-year plan. But that means that we're short every year until we hit that 6th year. We come
Correct.
up 100, right? And that money would go into the reserve, which I totally would support. I just wanted to clarify whether that would be claimable each year under this program.
Through the chair to Councillor Mattis, I know I read some material in another source, I won't name it, at a local government quoted that this project was wrapping up at the end of, had to be spent by the end of 2021. I have read all the material that has come out from the provincial government and also our government finance officers organization, who has been in communique with the provincial government. And this monies that we received, yes, we have to report on it through our annual financial statements, but there is no deadline, there is no timetable. So to answer your question in a long form, I believe that we can certainly use that moving forward.
Okay. Then going backwards, following up on that, going backwards, if we were at the, if we reached a point where we're through this and we're no longer claiming against that particular account because we've run out of things and we've made up the 9% and all of those other fees that we would be short each year, whether it be water or sewer, we've made that up along the way. And there's money still left at the very end. Is that something we could then go back and say to Parks and Rec, for example, we have this money to make up for that shortfall and we can give it to you now?
Through the chair to Councillor Mattis, I haven't broached that with the the provincial government, but I would certainly take that tact, absolutely. However, doing that, and this is how come I mentioned the regional district, I'm very cognizant of the fact that the Area C is pretty much an equal participant with us and a fantastic participant, that there should be some sort of sharing there. But absolutely, I firmly believe that you could certainly use that money to address some of those shortfalls in recreation, museum. Perhaps there's other economic development. There could be others that I'm not aware of.
Okay, was just wondering whether we can go back in time to, like, if that didn't happen until, say, 2022, where we determined that we had money, can we go back and put that against 2019 expenses?
I through the chair, I would certainly recommend that you try it, or the next CFO would. I would certainly think the provincial government would support it. I would not see why not. But like I said, we would have to, I guess, cross that bridge when the time came.
But it's worth a shot. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Michelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. Pretty self-explanatory on the revenue shortfall. The only first question I would have through to Doug, to the CFO, was the decrease in utility penalties. Was that, can you break that out? How much is water, sewer, and you know, go, so you can answer that one first, Doug, and then I'll wait.
Oh, okay. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt to Councillor Michelle. I could. I did not at that time, but I certainly could try to do that.
Yeah, because you probably can get those numbers, because then it could be cost share to the proper utility. The second question, where am I here? Okay, so more on the line of when we first had this discussion and then money was announced, I kind of said, well, how are we going to allocate it? And the answer was, well, you have to kind of prove you had a shortfall in your various departments to be able to access that money. So that's what this revenue shortfall line that comes to 541, I kind of gather that's what that is. So to be able to tap into, so we physically have that 1.591, and to tap into the 965 left, we would have to make another arbitrary decision for 2021. Like, let's just pick sewer or water again, because that was an arbitrary decision the council made when we decided that we would know we would forego the increases. So it cost us $221,000. So to be able to tap into the 965 would we have to make another decision similar to that?
Through the chair to Councillor Michelle, yes, I believe you would. If we were going to utilize some of that money to offset, shall we use water fund or sewer or any of the utilities, you could certainly do so with the belief of just what you're saying, the community struggling due to COVID, either economic recovery, lack of tourism, or et cetera. And so I in my estimation or my opinion, yes, you could.
Okay, because that, to me, because 960, it's almost $1 million. I guess the question is, can council or can towns just spend that where they want to, or do they have to physically demonstrate, like we did with these revenue shortfalls, that the town's has been hurt by it? In other words, it was hurt, and we decided to give to forgive those increases, so we lost this revenue. So that's how we explain how we can. Do they just let you spend that money anyway, or do you still have to account for it in the same way we did in 2020?
Through the chair to Councillor Michelle, we still have to account for it like we did in 2020. Keep in mind that this will form part of our financial statements. There's a schedule to our financial statements that has to be audited. So our auditor will ensure that the grant or the spending of the expenditure of funds of the grant are in accordance with the provincial government guidelines. But that being said, the guidelines that the provincial government put forward are quite broad. And so I would be quite comfortable if council somewhere during this year, for example, in 2021, says, we're not recovering the way we think we should be, and we really need a boost somewhere. I'm quite sure that that money could be used for that. Okay.
Because that's the only way I can foresee, being equitable with that 965,000 as to how you spend it. Councillor Mattis was questioning about 160,000, which is a 9% increase. So if you did not do that this year, then you could tap that in. And he was wondering if you could go forward with that. But I think you'd almost have to make that a decision each year, saying, okay, well, we think that we're impacted, and we want to be, our residents are impacted, so we don't want to have this increase this year. So we'll tap into the 965 and get the 160 from there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's I guess that's a discussion for the future. I agree with all these numbers and the way you presented them, but it's going to be a discussion that we're going to have as to how we allocate that.
Yeah, and I'll just add through the chair. Sorry, I don't mean to digress here, but
that's fine.
I am concerned a little bit, though, not a little bit, quite a bit, with recreation. Recreation hadn't been hit super hard, although in 2020, and the reason for that is because they had the wage subsidy program. So that helped on the expense side for them, but their revenues took a huge hit. And that's when I was talking with Carol Sheridan about this, because she goes, well, Doug, we weren't hit that bad. I said, well, yes, you were, Carol, because you tell me how your revenues did. If you wouldn't have had that program, now that program, as we all know, has come to an end. So as time moves forward here in 2021, their revenue shortfalls for their arena, for their programs, for parks, etc., is going to be drying up. And let alone you have the Vanderbilt Theater, we have the various Chamber of Commerce, we have OTA, and we are partners with Area C. And that's how come I mentioned Area C, because all that money that I put forward, and that's how come I mentioned at the end of my report, is that Area C at the moment is not contributing. And so, yes, we have this money, but we're equal partners. So that's how come I was really interested to hear where the regional districts come into the table on this. And I'll leave my soapbox. I'll leave that alone. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually, while I'm still here, Your Worship, I'll just say that's a good question, I guess. Did Area C, you mentioned 800 and something thousand. Did Area C get that, or the regional district get that?
The regional district got a little over 800,000, and they allocated about 300,000 to a few different things, particularly around the building that they occupy right now, which left about 550,000 to be allocated amongst all the other electoral areas. So that's not leaving a whole lot. It's not even $100,000 per electoral area. So, and what each electoral area will be able to, if they'll be, like they talked about each person getting an equal portion of it, but they also talked about some areas had more impact than other areas. Area C probably had more impact than, say, over by Headley there in that area. So that still has to be determined, but either way, it's not going to come close to covering even half of what the revenue loss was.
Yeah, they didn't get obviously the same benefit that the municipalities did. That's right. So
no, they only got about 800,000.
Yeah, for the entire regional district.
For the entire
I mean,
region.
when you're talking about the cost sharing on the various functions that Area C contributes to, they don't have the kind of, they don't have any numbers in reality. Yeah, it's going to be difficult.
Is that it, Councilor Michelle?
Yeah, that is. Well, I guess that we'll be discussing in the future how we're going to proceed in 2021, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would ask that the CFO check with the province, because when I read about this this money coming forward, I'm sure that it was to be all allocated by the end of 2021. I don't think there's any money that can be rolled into 2022 on this. So if the CFO could check that out, that would certainly help.
CAO, I think, wants to jump in.
Yep, CAO.
You're muted.
You're muted, Ken. I know.
I have to go through certain things to be unmuted. I have two things going here. With respect to that, we have checked into that, Councillor Schwarzenberger. It does not have to be expended by the end of 2021. What you have to do is you have to track it, and you have numerous years to use it, but it does not have to be completed by then. You do have to track it and keep it in a reserve and use it towards the items that have been identified by the province. There is no deadline on it, but they figured that most people would have it probably expended by the end of 2021, just given the situations that we have been in.
Thank you.
Councilor Ventimiglia.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that question that was just asked and answered was one of my first ones. How many years do we actually have to work through this? Because we know that some of the shortfalls that we're feeling are potentially going to snowball into a couple of years. I mean, specifically with Parks and Rec and some of our joint services. So I have a couple of questions. I think that a really good use of our funds is to address some of the shortfalls felt in, again, Parks and Rec and some of the other joint services. Knowing that the regional district really doesn't have a lot to work with, they don't have the funds that we have. In order to avoid putting Area C's budget under more stress, are these funds that we can use, that we can go outside of our regular funding formula and fund disproportionately higher than normal to account for some of the shortfalls? So that's one of my questions. Another question is, at what point and how do we even approach Area C to see if they're, or if Director Knodel is on the same page as we are going forward, if this is the direction that we choose to go in. And then, well, those are my regional district questions, so I'll ask those ones first.
I'll try to answer some of that anyway. Through the chair to Councillor Ventimiglia. For example, our joint services, the recreation, I'll jump on that one. If the town chose to go alone, and let's say we allocated, I don't know, let's say $100,000, I'll pick a number out of the air, that we're going to help out the Parks and Recreation. And even though we know there may not be money coming forward from Area C, I think staff would have, I would certainly take the tack that I would approach the regional district myself, because I remember when I used to be the CFO there years ago, and ask them to, when we do a tax requisition, usually what happens is you have revenue minus expenses, and the bottom line is taxes, and then that's shared between Area C and the town of Oliver. If we go down the path I'm suggesting, is we would do that same formula, but we would then take, whatever that net bottom line is, and say, yeah, but the town of Oliver, we're going to contribute $100,000. So take that off of our portion, and then you allocate the rest to Area C. So that's one way I could see possibly doing that, but that would definitely take some discussion with their staff, and they may not be supportive of that. But I know in years past, we have done that previously to try to make it equitable, because Area C can't get the money for themselves, where we do have this money that we can allocate to our Parks and Recreation, whereby we would still be getting the tax money from the Area C residents to support that service. We wouldn't be borne 100% by the town of Oliver. And I'm sure Director Knodel would be, I don't think, I'm quite sure the rural directors aren't totally thrilled with the lack of money or how it's being allocated as well. That's why this notice of motion came onto the table. And so it is, just so you know, the way the formula works is population based. And so it's just the reason why they didn't get as much money is because they don't have the population that the towns and the municipalities have. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think we could certainly work with Director Knodel, as well as the various joint services that we share, and try to work something out.
Okay, thank you. I think you answered my question. I don't fully understand the formula that was described, but I think what I did get from that is that if we wanted to contribute over and above our regular portion, there would be some way to do so, knowing that, again, we have the extra funds that Area C does not. So that's great. Thank you. And then I wanted to make a similar point about policing that was brought up earlier. I think it's really, I totally support those extra funds going into our policing reserve, because we already knew ahead of time that we weren't kind of filling that up fast enough anyway. So I completely support that. But I think it's been brought up, important for us to remember that the reason we were on this 5-year plan and now 6-year plan is because we're on a path to building capacity, so that when we are funding a greater portion of policing, we've gotten ourselves there, and there's not a big huge hike in the last year. So I think that that's really important to remember going in again to this year's budget. It's a tough decision to make, and it's a tough conversation to have, knowing that there are people that have been really hit hard by what's been going on for the past 10 months or whatever it's been. But there is a longer plan, there is an end goal, and we still need to be working towards getting ourselves there. So I just wanted to make that point. And then my last question was just around flexibility and creativity. So this was brought forward to me by a local business owner. Are we able, I know it's mentioned Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Association and that sort of thing, but are we able to use any of our monies to help support struggling businesses, or do they have to directly support the municipality? So for example, like a business license relief program for 2021, maybe not blanket get rid of business license fees, but like a fairly simple application, kind of like the federal government's been doing kind of on the honor system. If you feel like you need the relief of not paying your business fees for 2021, then here you go, we've got a little bit of a fund for that. Is that something that we could do, or is that outside of the bounds of how we can use the funds?
Through the mayor to Councillor Benjamil, I think that's a fantastic idea. I definitely think it certainly meets the criteria. I know that Diane Vakovich, she forwarded to me when Williams Lake approved their COVID restart monies. One of their things is they were actually, I shouldn't use the word channeling, but they were forwarding money through like a service contract through their Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce was then allocating that money out, and they had criteria, that terms of references and things like that. So I think a program like business licenses, maybe some other thing with the Chamber of Commerce or the OTA, I think is very worthy and worthwhile. I think maybe like you said, there has to be some, I don't know if it's a committee or some thought. Certainly it has to be some criteria around this, but I think something is definitely something's doable.
Yeah, and so if I may just follow up, this will be my last point. I'd be fully in favor then of having that be one of our conversations at budget time. I think that just like a blanket relief program it's not necessarily helping. It's helping those that need help, but then there's those that don't. There's some businesses that have, had their best year in recent memory, while there's others that, are really, really struggling. So if there's some way to funnel a portion of the funds, again, even through business license relief or something like that, to those that really need it, I would absolutely love to explore and see how we can make that happen, knowing that we have lots of pieces of the puzzle that are requiring funds. Thank you.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think most of my questions and comments have been covered already. However, I actually wanted to ask you, Mayor Johansson, if you have had any discussions with Director Knodel about shortfalls, or if you've identified any priorities based on whatever funding you end up getting for Area C.
For sure, we've talked about it, and that notice of motion just came out at the last meeting. So once it gets through and there's some criteria figured out how they're going to spend that money throughout the regional district, I think it'll become clear how much money Director Knodel is able to get out of that pot. Like I said, there is some discussion that it won't necessarily be an even split amongst everybody because some areas have way more needs than other areas. But that discussion, I would think, would happen at the next meeting, which is next Thursday, a week this Thursday. And there was a lot of support at the table that the money should be spent throughout the regional district, not the municipalities, because we're all getting a pretty good chunk of money ourselves. So I think there'll be some more clarity on that. And I know in the conversations I've had with Director Knodel, he's definitely willing to look at things like that, because that's a pretty clear loss in our area. He's probably suffering some of the most compared to most of the other areas.
So I think if that's sort of the direction that conversation is going, and it would be prudent for us to take a really good look at helping out our jointly funded services such as all Parks and Rec and the OTA. And I hesitate to speak for the theater because I work here, but I'll bring it up anyways. But just to make sure that that's on the radar as well, is there going to be an appetite to continue to fund the theater should there be another year of cancellations or shows with only 50 people and that sort of thing? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Councillor Mattis.
Thank you, Worship. I just wanted to clarify one thing for Councillor Michelle when I used the example of the $160,000, that it applied to every one of those revenue categories. When we gave up a 4% increase in water fees, we gave that up forever. That'll be 4% that we get hit with from now until eternity, unless we were to increase an extra percent for over 4 years to make that up. So I just wanted that to clarify that for him.
Any other comments, Council? I don't see any other hands. I guess I'd like to thank the CFO, a good report. I think there's going to be some opportunity in 2021. Anything we can do to help the people in town, the businesses in town that have really paid the hard price is definitely something worth looking into. I'd also like to make sure we look at other opportunities in our 2021 budget, whether it's the Grow Oliver Coordinator. I mean, that's economic recovery. There's lots of ways to spin the impact of COVID throughout a lot of the some of the operational or small capital expenses that we're going to have in 2021. So I'm looking forward to getting into budget and seeing where we can find those opportunities. We got a motion that council allocate $626,000 from the COVID-19 restart funds to areas affected as presented in the Chief Financial Officer's report dated January 11th, 2021, and that the balance be forwarded to 2021. Do I have a mover?
I'll move it.
Moved.
I'll second.
Second. Any further comments, discussion before I call a question? I'll call a question. Does anyone object with the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to item 2, Council Procedure Amendment Bylaw 1364.01. I'll pass this over to the corporate officer whose report is attached.
Thank you, Your Worship. The report before council is to seek enactment of the Council Procedure Bylaw, Amendment Bylaw 1364.01. If you'll recall, a report was brought to the Committee of the Whole December 14th meeting to review provisions contained within Council Procedure Bylaw with respect to COVID guidance that was provided by the Province of British Columbia, along with the introduction of a consent agenda within Section 15 of the Order of Proceedings and Business. Council was provided with information on the consent agenda, and the discussion from the council members was that you might want to limit it to approval of minutes. It will be a learning process for all of us, and we can work through that starting small. As well, council agreed to move the delegation and petitions item under the order of proceedings ahead of water matters. And this is primarily to accommodate guests who are waiting to speak to council. At times, it is inconvenient for delegations to wait until water matters are done due to the length of discussion and debate. Additional housekeeping matters under that section, as well as rise and report, was missing from the list. Additionally, there was some discussion on the time and location of meetings in section 4, and council's general feeling was that the date of 2nd and 4th Mondays and the time of 7 o'clock is perfect, and it does allow the community opportunity to participate. Under electronic meetings, council was in favor of changing must to may to allow the chair to attend electronic meetings, and as well a new provision adding committee members under electronic meetings who are unable to attend. They may also attend by electronic means. That currently is not in the council procedure bylaw. So the resolution before council is to, I'm having a little bit of hard time with my iPad again. The recommendation is that you have some options, sorry, that council may wish to give the first 2 readings to the procedure amendment bylaw. And from there, we would have to advertise 2 times consecutively in the local paper for any feedback from the community. And then we would bring it back for 3rd reading and adoption. So the recommendation is that council procedure bylaw amendment bylaw 136401 be read a first and second time, and that you direct staff to proceed with the public notification as prescribed in the community charter, and that 3rd reading and adoption be scheduled for a future meeting. I can take any questions if council has any. Thank you.
Any comments, questions, council? Councillor Bentamila?
I mean, I'm just saying this out loud, kind of wondering what others think, just about the electronic meetings. So basically making it easier for everyone, including the chair, to attend electronic meetings, which is great, especially right now. And then committee members who are unable to attend a council committee meeting may participate in the meeting by electronic means, also great, because situations arise, in regular life and regular times where we need to attend electronically, and I've done that before. But I wonder, obviously we're in a special time right now, and I wonder when we go back to regular council meetings where we're meeting, in the same room, and we've all agreed that that's the best way to be engaged and to have the, most fulsome conversations. Should there be some wording there limiting, you wouldn't want to count, I'm not saying that this would happen here, but you wouldn't want a counselor that attends all meetings electronically while everyone else is in the room and, just has this, you don't even have to be here basically for however long to do that. And so I'm just throwing that out there, kind of wondering what others think about that, if there should be some wording around, special circumstances or, 3 in a row unless, a special permission is given, something like that. I don't know. Just for conversation.
It's all quiet.
If there's any conversation.
Mayor
Councillor
Johansson, sorry.
Yes.
Currently, under the electronic provisions section in your procedure bylaw, if a council or a committee member who is unable to attend a meeting, a council committee of the whole meeting or committee meeting, there is a provision that states that they may, upon authorization of the mayor, participate in a meeting by electronic or other communication means. So that, could be by video teleconferencing or electronic. So we are kind of in COVID means, but there is the provision that when we hopefully soon go back to normal, that if a council member had to attend by regular means, they would need to seek permission of the mayor.
Okay, that's
Okay.
exactly what I was looking for. So that's
Great.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Corporate Officer. Councillor Mattis, that,
I was just going to say, I'm happy with the way it is.
okay. Good comments. Any other comments?
I'll move the recommendation or the proposed motion.
Move Councillor Grace,
Second,
second Councillor Mattis. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. Does anyone object with the motion? Motion is carried. The next item is the December water report. The engineering technologist report is attached, and I'll pass it over to the Director of Operations if he has any comments and if there's any questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. The purpose of this report is to provide a summary of the water system operations by the town in the month of December. So I'll just briefly go through the report, and if there are any questions, you can stop me. The first thing under rural water systems on December 2nd, we found that we had some damaged pipe by our Black Sage domestic pump houses, and we're currently still investigating it, and we have an insurance adjuster looking at it with their engineer, and we're hoping to know more in the next week or two, and we're gonna the CAO and myself will come to council and give you guys an update at that time. In town, we did some maintenance on various things, valves and installed ventilation pipes for an inlet and outlet at our reservoir valve chamber, which always has too much moisture in it. And also installed a pressure sensor at Tuckalnuit Pump House. The temperatures in December were above average in what we've seen over a 30-year period. And the precipitation was actually just above average as well. Most of that was rain instead of snow. And as far as the consumption usage for December, it was the yearly usage is just below our 7-year average. And also our consumption for the month of December was just below 2019 levels and just above the 7-year average for December. And other than that, all testing, everything came in clean for the month of December, and I'll take any questions if anybody has any further questions.
Thank you, Director. Any questions?
Your Worship, it's Rick. And just, I was going to ask on when I read this, and then you mentioned that we're talking to our insurance people on that hammer at the Black Sage. What's the estimated cost to repair that, Sean?
It could be high, and we don't know the extent of the damages yet, so it'd just be guessing at this point. So what we've done is sole sourced or hired a contractor, which have already done a little bit of work just exposing the pipe so we could initially look at it, and they're going to continue to do more of that with the assurance and adjuster and their hired engineer to look at it, and True Engineering will be involved as well as our staff. So we'll all be going out there meeting and figuring out what the problem was and what was the main cause, and it could have been numerous things. And then the water hammer was from pumps kicking off and on at Black Sage for about a 2.5 hour period that maybe have put it over the edge, but there could have been some other underlying problems.
Okay.
Yeah,
we'll find out, I guess, going forward.
Yeah,
hopefully insurance will cover it, because it sounds like it'd be quite expensive.
it could be expensive, the worst case scenario. But we're hoping it won't be the worst case scenario
Okay.
at this point.
I'll move receipt, Your Your worship, I've got no other questions.
Thank you, Councillor Michelle. Can I get a seconder?
Second that.
Thank you,
Councillor Sutter.
Councillor Stu. Call, any further discussion? Call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. We'll move into reports. Anything to report this evening, Water Councillor Sadu?
Thank you, worship. Just tonight's meetings.
Okay, thank you. And the same Water Councillor Michelle, anything to report this evening?
Nope, same.
Okay.
Finished packing apples before Christmas, so I've had a break. 2 weeks off.
Well, okay, thank you. Moving to business, property taxation distribution. The CFO has a report for us. Pass it over to you, Mr. Leahy.
You done mute, Doug?
Unmute. Did I get unmuted? There we go.
Are you good?
I got to apologize for the length of the report, but I thought in order to do this subject justice, I had to do a little bit of background, a little bit of history as to how property tax policy is established, how it actually functions, how it works. It's many people feel that it's quite simple, but I can tell you that anything to do with taxation, whether it be property taxation, whether it be income taxation, taxation is anything but simple. So therefore, at the November 23rd council meeting, at that meeting, council passed a resolution to provide information in regards to the shift, the burden, possibly shift, examine the burden of shifting it from the business to the residential. And the report should include any analysis of any shift in the tax burden amongst the two property classes. Also to include a description of alternative tax distribution methods, including pros and cons, and the report include a competitive comparison analysis of business tax rates in Oliver and that of neighboring municipalities. As background, and I'm going to go on for a little while here, before a property can be taxed, there must be a measure that is used to assign taxation to a property. Property taxation pays for government administration, debt, staffing, fire protection, roads, parks, sidewalks, policing, etc. There are other sources of funding for services, such as user fees for services, but this report only deals with the principles of property taxation policy. The British Columbia Assessment Authority assigns a value and a classification to every parcel of land in British Columbia. They do so utilizing three methods. Number one is the direct comparison approach, commonly used for residential property. And basically that is the market value of your property as of a specific date. Everyone just recently, or everyone by now should have received their 2021 assessment notice in the mail. And they assign your market value as of July 1 in 2020. And that is the direct comparison approach. The cost approach is used most often when the property is new or nearly new and there are no comparable sales or the improvements are unique or specialized. So primarily for residential, they'll use a direct comparison, but at times they'll have to use the cost approach. Now for the business class is quite a bit different. They'll use an income approach, and I'll talk about that later, but it's used for appraising income producing properties, which are in the assessment class. They're the light industrial, the heavy industrial, and the class 6, which is the business class. We don't have any class 4, which is heavy industrial. We just have light industrial and business. A tax rate is calculated by establishing the cost of the level of services and divided it into the assessed value. It gets further complicated when calculating the tax for each classification of properties. In Oliver, 87% of the tax base is residential, and the remainder is business, light industrial, recreation, and farmland. Table 1 on page 43. Now, I'm using the pages from the iPad, and hopefully, if anybody's logged into our system and online, I believe the page numbers do correspond. Table 1 provides a detailed analysis of tax rates within the Okanagan and Similkameen valleys. The recreation taxation for the town is included for comparison purposes, as all jurisdictions do not fund recreation on a regional basis, except for Keremeos and Vernon. So therefore, to get a true comparison, I had to include the town of Oliver's recreation. The Oliver residential rate from that table 1, you'll note, is the second lowest, and the business tax rate is the third lowest of all of the 16 comparables. Table 2 on page 44 details the actual amount, the 2020 assessment roll breakdown between residential and business. Oliver is equal to the average for residential, which is 87%, and we're about 2% above the average for business. So we are at 11%, but the average actually is 9% across all class 6 of all the municipalities that I'm comparing in table 2. And by the way, the source of all my information for this, if anybody's wondering how I got this information, this is all available publicly online through the provincial government's statistics through their local, I think it's the infrastructure brand. Anyway, it's a very good website where you can get all kinds of information for tax rates, assessments, etc. Table 3 goes further, and it details the tax burden that is apportioned to residential versus the business class. What I mean by tax burden is that is the actual amount, the 71% of our taxation is actually levied to the residential class, and 23% of our taxes are levied to the business class. So therefore, if you would have went back to the previous where you see in table 2, it was 87%, and yet we're levying 71%, that forms a gap of 16%, whereby the gap between what the actual assessment is and who is actually paying taxes, which class. And that's what table 4 is actually doing. You will see in Oliver, you'll see the gap of 16% on the residential side and the minus 12 on the business side, meaning that the businesses are picking up 12% more than what the assessed values are. And you'll see just above Oliver there, you'll see Osoyoos, where theirs is the -6 and 8. So we do have quite a bit of disparity between us and Osoyoos. The tax rate ratio, what that is actually showing on provides a history of the assessments, tax burden, and tax ratios back to 2005. You'll see the tax burden on the business class has ranged from 21% to 26%. And on the residential, the tax burden has gone anywhere from 69 to 74%. So it's fairly consistent. You wouldn't think it would be, but it is. It's fairly consistent year over year, even going back to 2005. You'll note in 2012, where there was starting to be a shift, and that was when council last looked at, they set the actual tax ratio at 2.71. Subsequently, in 2013, they set it at the tax ratio at 2.45. And what that means is the tax ratio will be, the residential tax ratio is 1. And so whatever tax rate is in the residential sector, the business has to be 2.45 times higher. The impact of non-market assessment. What non-market is new construction on assessment rolls. Assessments fluctuate in 2 ways. They either fluctuate by market, which is the value of your property, or non-market, which is new construction, or it could be stratification and reclassification. For example, a class 6 property, which was 100% class 6 property, is being redeveloped and then goes for primarily like a condo tower where you get the main floor is class 6 and then 20 stories above it becomes class 1. So that's also classified as new market, or non-market, I should say, new construction. The first table on page 48 relates to the impact of new construction as well as the rising assessments due to market forces. The second table shows the change versus the previous year. Since 2013, the residential tax share has averaged 5.5% versus the business tax share of 3.5%. And you will note in that same table, you'll see where the assessment, the market assessments are really have in 2017, 18, especially 2018 and 2019, the market has really shifted 11.3%, 8.2%. Meanwhile, on the business side, you see it's only gone 5.6 and 6.6. So you can see the residential is consistently, the market is always shifting higher, primarily, not always, but then the business sector. Table 5 goes forward, and it then moves on to what is our business tax ratio in comparison to all our other comparable jurisdictions in the comparison. We've been set since 2013 at 2.45. You'll see we're not the highest, we're not the lowest. Osoyoos certainly is very low. They've set there as far back as the data that I could find. They've been at 1.6, and that is a council directive that they are at 1.6. Table 6 moves on, and what table 6 is showing is the residential and business taxes per capita, where in Oliver we have $377 per capita, and 119 is the average. Oh, my mistyped there. And 634. Oh, I'm sorry. It was 300. I'm reading my notes. Taxation per capita is 377, and the average is 634. And for business, we're 119, and the average is 143. So in both cases, we're below the average of all the comparables. The summary that I will go through is the intent of the property taxation system is fairness. When designing property tax policies, there will be a difficult trade-offs between fairness and revenue needs. Fairness may mean giving low-income people or organizations some form of property tax relief, such as tax exemptions. It is important to realize that fairness in one group of taxpayers will lead to outcries from a different group of taxpayers. The challenge is to create a system whereby all groups feel it is balanced and will reflect their values and needs. Moving forward, there are 3 distribution methods to be used when we're spreading taxes across our different assessment bases. We can use the revenue neutral approach, the tax burden approach, or the tax ratio approach. The town of Oliver uses the tax ratio approach. Revenue neutral approach, quite simply, is that all is when the amount of revenue from each class remains the same year over year. So everybody will pay the same. For example, if we raise property taxes 9%, all classes go up 9%. There is no shift. It's all classes go up. And you can see in my example whereby the assessments change, the tax ratio will change, but the amount of taxes that we actually raise have to remain exactly the same because all classes are picking up the same. The tax burden approach is slightly different, where we're saying, okay, we're going to, on a snapshot, we're going to say that the residential class is 20% and 80% the business class. And if we do that, therefore, once again, what has to happen to do that approach is that the tax ratio has to change. So therefore, you will have an increase or a decrease depending upon which class you're in. The tax burden approach was utilized primarily, I know City of Vancouver still uses it. Also, City of Penticton was using it, and now they have just recently, 3 years ago, moved to the revenue neutral approach. Tax ratio is the approach that the town of Oliver is currently using. And it's quite simply where the business class ratio in my example was set at 4. And if it has to be at 1.6, then the ratio, the rate has to constantly be changing to attain that rate of 2.45. Like I said, it's quite complicated. I'm not sure, hopefully my examples, you went through them and could make some use of them. I know, like I said, they can be complex. Bottom line, if council chooses to approve to change the tax ratio, for example, and shift the burden from business to residential, currently we're at 2.45. If we shift it down to 2, utilizing our 2020 data, that would mean a property taxation shift of $87,000 from the business class to the residential class. And if we tried to shift it to the 1.6, that would mean a shift of $171,000 over to the residential class. And just for an example, when we do shift, a 1% shift is about what did I have here? $50 per, or hang on, let me just read my notes. Since I did put that in my notes. The impact of shifting from 2.45 on the residential property in Oliver would be $50 or 5% shift for both classes of 5 and 6. If we're going to do it, if the town of Oliver, you'd have to do it for class 5 and class 6 because they're both at the 2.45 tax ratio. Phased in over 2 years, it would be $25 per year and 2.5% tax increase on the residential versus business class. In summary, the remainder of the report is for your use and how property tax policy and is actually established. I was involved in this about 5 or 6 years ago when I was at the City of New Westminster, and I actually got to meet these 3 esteemed experts of property taxation policy, Dr. Stanley Hamilton, Dr. Adams, and Dr. Enid Slack. And they're all very astute and they're very esteemed in their field of the 6 principles of taxation policy. So it's quite, like I said, I know it's a very difficult and a complicated subject to understand, but I thought I'd have to spend the time to go through that with you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, CFO. It's a great report. Tons of information, almost information overload. I guess one of the questions that comes to mind quickly is the 9% that we've been doing with the RCMP. If I'm reading this correctly, then that is impacting businesses quite a bit more than residential, or is that incorrect?
That's incorrect. They get paid, they are impacted exactly the same. I actually ran that through my tax model just to prove that out. They are getting 9% and so is the residential.
Well, but
Yeah, but if they're getting a 2.45 tax distribution, wouldn't that result in them paying more?
No, because the assessments are shifting differently. Because the assessments are shifting, the market value assessments are shifting quite substantially higher than the business class.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That was one of the questions that I did have from when we started this process. Any comments, questions, Council? Councilor Mattis.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is a heck of an interesting report. Not exactly light reading, but very interesting nonetheless. My question through to the CFO is regarding Table 3 and Table 4. I believe that they give the same information in 2 different forms, but my question more relates to this on Table 4 especially. If we drop from 2.45 down to 2.0, do you have any idea what it will do to this gap that we have, the 12 on one side and the 16 on the other? Would that bring that, any idea what that would bring that down to?
Through the chair to Councillor Mattis, just by doing rough math in my head, I would think the gap on the residential side should come down to about, if we went from 2.45 to 2, it should come down to about 12% on the residential, about 9 on the business.
Okay, so it could still go a ways yet to get, we're still putting a larger burden on the industrial commercial, but that's, and when we talk about how they're struggling these days, anything we can do there would help. So it's a good start. Great report. Thank you.
Councillor Ventimiglia.
Thank you, Your Worship. I really don't have anything to say at this exact moment, aside from thank you for the report, because it is, I think, very well done. And as the mayor said, perhaps information overload, so it may take a little bit of time to sort through it. But I really appreciate that the mayor brought this up in the first place, and that we have the opportunity to kind of study and understand why things are the way they are, and what we could potentially do either this year or in the coming years to help to start to shift that burden a bit. Obviously, to do it all at once, if that's something that we were to consider doing, looks like it would then perhaps unduly shift the burden onto residential in a way that we also don't want to do in a year like this or even next. But I really appreciate all the information, and I look forward to having further conversation about the subject. So thank you.
Through the mayor or to council, I just want to also mention, since we were on that table 4, I don't know if anybody really noticed that the town of Princeton had no gap on the business side. The reason for that, just so you know, is the effect of that warehouse or mill, because they load, like, their residential tax rate. I don't know if you've noticed that when you're going through it, how low it is, simply because of that mill. Even in table 3, if you look at table 3, you'll see Princeton's residential versus business. They have 18% is their residential tax burden. That's just unheard of. But I mean, it's just the impact of when you get a big industry. Conversely, though, when that industry leaves, you can see the trouble they get into. So it's one thing to have that industry, but when it's gone, there's some severe problems that happen, and it's happened in a lot of communities across Canada. I would also want to mention that there is no decision has to be made tonight. This is our tax rates don't get adopted till towards the end of April, early May. So it's more, that's when the decision has to be made at that point in time. So like I said, this was more information for council to go over in their mind, to think about, and maybe come back to me with some further questions and further analysis to be done.
Councillor Grice.
Thank you, Your Worship. And yes, thank you to the CFO. There was definitely a lot to digest here. I did want to ask how often you think the tax ratio should be adjusted, if this is something that we want to do yearly. And I know that you didn't give us a recommendation for a distribution method, but I'm wondering if you're leaning in any particular direction there. Thank you.
Thank you to the chair, to Councillor Grice. I did actually have a recommendation, then I took it out because I thought, geez, I don't want to lead council down the path here.
Oh, please, you're the expert.
Well, I am very cognizant of the fact, like, we're really tied down the South Okanagan with Osoyoos, Area C, Area A, et cetera. And obviously, we try to do the best to help out the small businesses. And so I was really more leaning myself personally to moving it to the 2-to-1 ratio, probably doing that over a period of 2 years, so you wouldn't hit residential all in 1 year and shift it. So you do it, it doesn't have to be 2 years, it could be 3 years, but you start to shift that a little bit just to provide some relief to the business sector. The 2.45, that probably is a very good ratio in a really robust economic place. For example, the Lower Mainland, I know when I was in New Westminster, our ratio was 3.7, 3.8. City of Vancouver just recently in the last 10 years shifted down. They were as high as 7. Now I think they're around 5. So, but you got to understand, look at their business versus the town of Oliver and the town of Osoyoos. So it's really the appetite of council and how they wish to help out their businesses versus, who should share that burden. I know we can always say that the businesses, yes, they can write the taxes off because it's on their taxable income. But the old adage always is, well, you have to make money in order to write that money off. So
You
there
have to
has to
spend
be,
it.
yeah, well, that too. There has to be a happy medium somewhere. So the 2 seems like a reasonable one at this point in time, then analyze it again. 1.6 might be a little low. I know the city of Penticton was trying to go to 1.5. They've now pulled away from that. And I think they're around 1.7 or 1.8 now. So they're slowly starting to creep that up. But so I'll leave it at that.
So if I may follow up, you would recommend then staying with the tax ratio, tax distribution method and not shifting to a different method?
I would agree with you there. I would shift it down, but I would make the recommendation to start phasing it down to at least 2 to 1. Now, council may go farther. That's your prerogative, but that's where I would shift it in and see what happens. Maybe things turn around. Maybe they go worse. We can go from there.
Thank you.
Councillor Mattis, you have your hand up?
I do. One more question through to the CFO. If we were to, I like everything you've said so far. I certainly would like to get to the 2.0. If we were to get there faster, would we be able to claim the loss of revenue through the COVID program?
We'll cross that bridge at a different time.
Councillor Ventimiglia, you got your hand back up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention also, like, the nice news out of this report is that our residential and business taxes per capita are lower than, like, quite a bit lower than the average in the communities that just in the area, basically. So that's something that I think we hear every now and then, but it's something that's kind of nice to share out. It's good news.
Doug, just one other comment and stuff that I've been reading. It seems like the tax ratio approach is what councils use to make changes to their tax distribution. And then once they get to where they want to get to, they shift to, like Penticton did, a revenue neutral approach. Is that, it doesn't look like staying with the tax ratio has really had a negative impact, although it depends on assessment values, but it seems like it's been working pretty well for our community anyway. Maybe it's more impactful in larger communities like Penticton, where they need to get bounced back and forth from one approach to another. Maybe you could just comment on that.
Yeah, I was involved in Penticton when they were shifting down to 1.5. That was the mandate. Staff didn't agree with it, but that's neither here nor there. The ratio approach, all approaches will work. The revenue neutral approach is probably the fairest. However, saying that though, you have to have a vibrant business community and a commercial sector. And if you have, for example, Kelowna, Penticton even per se, Lower Mainland, they have very robust commercial sectors. You have a huge market to draw on. Your whole economy is totally diversified versus the Okanagan, South Okanagan Valley. So some of the smaller communities, this is where I think the tax ratio actually works quite well. And it has worked quite well. Certainly in Osoyoos, it's worked well. I don't hear a lot of negativity out of Osoyoos. It worked fairly well in Oliver. And so even in Penticton before that was using the tax burden. And because they put a snapshot, they said, I remember it was back in 2010 or 2009, they had one class of assessment was growing much faster than the other, and it was the residential one, and it was really starting to skew the tax ratio. So they really wanted to put a clamp on it. It's like anything. Anytime you are interrupting market forces, it creates good and bad. But I think at this point in time in Oliver, by moving towards a fixed ratio of, let's say 2 for the sake of argument, I think would be a good move going forward. and then you can evaluate, or the next council can evaluate it again in however long a period of time they want to do that.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the other part of my question. I'll just go back to the CFO for that. So the ratio was last set in 2012. Is it something where council should be just reviewing it based on what's happening in the community economically, or should there be a schedule for review yearly, once per council cycle, or do you have a recommendation?
I don't, probably if I had to make through the chair, probably, I don't know if you have to do it every year, but maybe, every 4 years, certainly with the council turnover. This information is readily available, like I said, on the provincial government website. So it could be done annually, but it's, I don't know if it's that meaningful annually. It's certainly, you start to see better patterns over a longer period of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, CFO. So I guess maybe the recommendation is that we will carry this forward and have a closer look at this during our budget discussions and make a decision before whenever that is, we have to make a decision once we see the impact of what's been approved in budget, and then we can look at whether we want to do this over a 2 or 3 year period. I think it sounds to me like there's some appetite to explore this further and see what the impacts of getting down to 2 would be. It seems like there's some room for us to make some adjustments here to help out the business community for sure. I hope those are fair comments. I see Councillor Mattis has his hand up.
Well, I was just going to make a motion that we receive the report. I think that this will come up at budget discussion anyways. At this point, it's just receive the report. So the motion would be that council receive the report from the CFO regarding property tax distribution.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further comments or call a question?
Budget's not that far away. We're not going to forget.
No. 2 weeks in a day. Does anyone object with the motion? To the motion? Motion passed. Thank you again, CFO. Great report. Item 2, transfer of lease. Walter Lannon to Lannon Aviation Incorporated. I'll pass this over to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report before council is to transfer the lease from Mr. Lannon to his business name, Lannon Aviation Incorporated. There has been some history with this hangar back to 1995, where we entered into the agreement. In 2014, he requested that it be changed from his business name to his personal name. Since that time, he has incorporated his business one more time in May 2018, and it is active. And he's again asking council to just change the name for his purposes. Just so council is aware, under the delegation bylaw, his lease agreement will expire, and he asked for the term to be extended, which was in his agreement, and this was done. So this lease agreement will expire in 10 years, November 30th, 2030. So the recommendations before council are to direct staff to amend the lease agreement for Hangar 17 from Walter Lannon to Lannon Aviation Incorporated, and to authorize the town signing authorities to execute the modification agreement, which is attached to the corporate officer's January 11th, 2021 report. If anybody has any questions, I'll take them.
Questions, council?
I'll move the proposed motion.
Thank you, Councillor Grace.
I'll second.
Second, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to correspondence, the corporate officer has a report for us.
Thank you, Your Worship. The correspondence report before council has three action items. The first one is correspondence from Okanagan Basin Water Board regarding the Okanagan flooding and the review of the Okanagan Lake regulation system. OBWB is specifically asking the government of British Columbia to undertake and/or fund the necessary studies identified by a gap analysis and move with the review of the lake regulation system and its operating plan with the goal of completing the review within the next 5 years. Okanagan Basin Board is asking council to draft a letter. They're not providing a template in support of this review, and it's required by February 15th, 2021 to be included in their package. If you have any questions on that item.
I have no questions, but I think it'd be a good idea for us to provide some support. We are impacted by the Okanagan Lake and the levels that are being released out of Okanagan Lake and the impacts on the channel. So I would definitely support a motion.
I'll make that motion that council provide a letter of support.
Second.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question. And does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried.
Thank you. The next item is correspondence from SILGA, the Southern Interior Local Government Association. They're calling for resolutions for consideration at the virtual annual general meeting, which is tentatively to be held sometime between April 27th and April 30th. The deadline for receipt of resolutions is Friday, February 26th. The proposed motion is that this item be included on the next committee of the whole meeting for discussion of possible resolutions, or council may wish not to submit resolutions, or you may receive and file.
I'll move proposed motion A.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? I'll call a question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion carries.
Thank you. The next piece of correspondence again is from SILGA regarding their Community Excellence Award nominations. They have 3 categories: environmental sustainability, social responsibility, and economic development. They're doing the call for nominations in those categories, and the submission deadline is February 1st, 2021. I've put in a couple of ideas for council, which could be the Grow Oliver under the economic development, and the Bridge Park, which would be under social responsibility. And so council could choose to do that, or if you have other recommendations, or just to receive and file.
Anyone like any of those ideas, council?
I would move the proposed motion with the projects that were recommended.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried.
And the last action item is correspondence dated January 6th from Oliver Parks and Recreation Society requesting the town of Oliver to submit an application to the COVID-19 Resilience Infrastructure Stream. And this is to assist Oliver Parks and Recreation with the cost of retrofit and or replacement of public washroom buildings in Oliver. The letter is attached. The manager of Oliver Parks and Recreation, she has been sitting on our meeting. She is available to and I've allowed her to talk. If council has any questions with regards to this application, they would submit it on behalf of the town of Oliver, and they would, apply through our portal. And I do have the resolution that council may wish to provide a supportive resolution to submit the grant application, to retrofit and replace public washrooms. Or you may deny or just receive and file.
Councilor Mattis?
So just for clarification, they will make the submission on our behalf? Because the way this is worded, it looks like we're making, and I'm just wondering which administration is doing this.
The town of Oliver, it would be through our grant application, but it would be for Oliver Parks and Rec. It would be looking like we are submitting the application.
But who's doing the actual work?
Oliver Parks and Rec.
Okay.
Councilor Ventimiglia?
Sorry, you're muted, Council Ventimiglia.
Thank you. I was going to move the proposed motion, but so I guess proposed motion A. And then also, seeing as we have the direct, what's the official title? Manager of Parks and Recreation with us. If everyone else is open to the idea, I just wondered if we could have like a bit of a description of what the project actually, aside from the obvious, what the project actually is about.
I'll move it or I'll second it for discussion.
Thank you, Councilor Mattis.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for considering the motion. The project is important to Oliver, I think, because the park washrooms that we are finding now, we're doing a little bit of research on when they were built, but we're finding a range of, anywhere from 1983 to the late 90s. And the buildings were designed to accommodate one or two people in each side of the facility. They're not designed for accessibility whatsoever, and are also not designed to be able to remain open once the temperatures drop. So what that does is we've and actually with the town's support have now formed this pretty incredible active transportation route from the hike and bike through Lyons, across Bridge Park over to Kinsman. If you walk the loop on the river, you can come back through Community Park. And so all of these facilities saw quite a lot of use through COVID-19 because being outside was safer. It was being promoted through Dr. Henry as a way to go out and get exercise and socialize. And so we did see quite a lot of activity in our parks. We weren't able to get the washrooms open until the middle of April. And then we had to close them again at the end of September. And I think what we'd all really like to see is more activity downtown, more people using that active transportation route with more accessible washrooms that are available year round. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the description. I think, it is a description above and beyond just the simple description there. So I appreciate it, understand it even more now, and I'm very happy that I moved the motion.
Thank you, Carol. Any other questions, Council, before I call the question? Hearing none, does anyone object to the motion? Motion is passed.
you, Your Worship. Thank you, Carol, for waiting on. The last item is for information items, correspondence from SILGA regarding the needed updates to the members' constitution. And secondly, correspondence from SILGA regarding the call for nominations in 2021 to seek a position on the SILGA executive for the 2021-2022 term. The motion is that the correspondence items listed in J5 and the weekly mail correspondence be received. Thank you.
Can I get a
So
move? Councillor Grace, just a second, had a hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on the second piece of correspondence there, I would like to let my name stand. I know last year I was required to have a letter of support, I believe, from council. So I hope to have council and staff's support on that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. You have to get something signed for that, Councillor Grace? Just a letter? A nomination form?
I can look into that. I mean, it didn't specify, I don't think, in this letter here, but I will find out.
Okay, sure. Did I hear a mover of receipt? Yes, I need a seconder.
Sure, second.
Thank you. Call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to reports, the first one is the building permit activity report for December 2020. It's here for receipt. Does anyone have any comments or questions for the CAO? Councillor Mattis?
I don't have any questions, but the comment would be that if you look at the residential values, you can see that the cost of building a house has gone up significantly year over year when you look at the number of residences versus the values. And then the second part was, this is on the year to date or the full year report, was the real nice jump in commercial value, which relates back to our tax multiples and everything else that we talked about earlier on, getting a little bit of a diversification in our economy.
Don't see any other comments. Can I get a mover to receive?
I will do that. I will move that receipt.
Thank you. Seconder, please.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any other discussion, comments? Call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. And item 2, the fire department activity report for December 2020. Again, this report is here for receipt. If there's any questions, they can be referred to the CAO.
I'll move receipt.
Thank you. Second, please.
Seconded.
Thank you. Call the question. Does anyone object to the motion? Motion is carried. Moving to councillor reports. Councillor Ventimiglia.
Just this evening's meetings, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Schwarzenberger.
Thank you, Worship. Today's meetings, and I just want to wish anybody who's watching a Merry Christmas. Lots of Zoom get-togethers over Christmas, and darn, I wish I'd have bought stock in Zoom before when this all started 8 months ago or 9 months ago.
Thank you, Councillor Schwarzenberger. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of meetings over the long break we had there. Wednesday, December 16th, had a SILGA Communications Committee meeting discussing the website, social media, newsletter, and sponsorship. And on the 21st of December, had an Oliver Parks and Rec Society meeting to bring forward the motion that was just discussed here and today's meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grace. Councillor Mattis.
Today's meetings.
Thank you. December 14th for me was RDOS. December 21st, Oliver Parks and Recreation, short meeting and a little bit of a social get together, a Zoom party. and January 7th, RDOS. And just some updates on Sunnybank. There's now 22 positive COVID cases there, 16 residents and 6 staff. McKinney has had 1 additional death for a total of 15 residents who have passed away. Condolences, heartbreaking for the community. Condolences for Mayor and Council of Town and Oliver. The good news is a number of residents and staff have been getting vaccinated. So hopefully there's brighter days ahead, but definitely just so heartbreaking for so many people. Upcoming meetings, January 25th is our regular open council meeting. Next open regular council meeting, and January 26th is our first special open budget meeting. Acting mayor schedule for January, February is Councillor Schwarzenberger. And public question period, opportunity for the audience to ask questions regarding matters discussed during the current meeting. I don't think we have anyone in attendance, but if there is somebody that would like to ask a question, please put up your hand. Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second. Seconded, please.
Second.
One last second. Thank you. Does anyone object to the motion? We are adjourned. Thank you, council. Have a good evening.